Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Social. You'll see we have a shiny new logo, and it now says Kidlit Social instead of the Kidlit Distancing Social. So I'm really happy to take that distancing off, even though we are still on Zoom. But I feel closer to you somehow now that we have that word distancing off of there. So that's awesome. We're going to be making a few more changes too. This month's a little weird because we're going to be out of town toward the end of the month. So we have a guest this week, we'll have a guest next week, and then that's it until August. So don't panic if you try to log in and no one's here. It's just because vacations, etc. Starting in August, we're going to be going to twice a month, the first and third Tuesday of each month. Uh, that's going to be our new schedule from now on because we got lots going on. And I love doing this, but it's hard to do every week. And so this way I get to keep doing it and keep having great guests twice a month. But don't worry, we'll be emailing you if you're on our list as to what our guests are and when we're on. So you don't have to remember all that. Just check your emails, check Facebook, however you usually find out about us, and you'll know when we're on and what's happening. Okay. If you're new to us and this is your first time, welcome here. If you want to get on our list so that you can be informed of our guests and keep track of when the Kidlit Social is going to be on, go to writeforkids.org/ultimate cheat sheet, and you'll get on our list and you'll be notified of all the fun stuff we do. Plus, you will get a free ebook, The Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet, where we have compiled 31 years of beginner knowledge how to get started writing for kids in one handy ebook, and it's yours. And if you are interested in subscribing to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is the product that is celebrating its 31st anniversary this year, $5 a month, special offer just for our socialites, writeforkids.org/CBI, delivered to your inbox every month, about 20 pages, lots of great info, including one exclusive above the slush pile submission code for either an editor or agent every month that allows you to jump over the slush pile with your submission, and access to our online database of information called the CBI Clubhouse that also comes with your subscription. Celebrate! This is my favorite part of every week. Well, almost. I love my guests probably the most, but so I have two great celebrates this week, and these two socialites really understand the spirit of celebrate. You know how every week I say it doesn't have to be a publishing contract. It could be any little thing you want to celebrate in your writing journey. So that's what we've got this week. Awesome. First of all, Catherine Piazza, who's here, said, I've just finished reading the two-book middle grade series City Spies by James Ponti, which are, in my humble opinion, the best middle grade books ever written in this genre. They're very mystery and suspense. These are mystery and suspense, extremely well written, very easy to follow, clear, detailed where needed, fast paced. Just awesome. You can read what she said. And she said it's like James Ponti took all the middle grade writing classes that Catherine has attended, she listed a bunch, and then applied it to all his writing. So I love this because we are very, very big in CBI and our writing blueprints and my writer's secret sauce, the new coaching program I have, learning from other writers. Find writers who do what you want to do, and they do it really well, and study them and learn from them. This is a perfect example. And I love getting recommendations of books. And I knew of James Ponti. I admit I have not read this series. And so guess what? I went to the library and got it, and I have it sitting right on that desk behind me, and I'm going to start it tonight because of your recommendation, Catherine. So thank you for that. And I hope those of you who are writing middle grade, especially mystery or suspense, will check these books out. And Violet LeMay, our friend Violet LeMay, writes, I have so many good things to share with you. I'm actually drafting a novel. I have found a critique partner. I've got at least 3 picture book ideas in progress. Yay. And she says, thank you. Well, thank you, Violet. You did all this hard work, not us. But this is awesome. This is what we love to celebrate. The creative juices flowing and good ideas and finding a critique partner, which is a huge step. So thank you for those 2 celebrates. I want to hear your good news. You can email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will feature your news on a future Kidlit Distancing social. If you have a book come out, please attach a book cover and make sure you let us know the publisher and the pub date, and I'll put that in the announcement. So, and if you want to write like a little 1-sentence description so we know sort of the age group or what the book's about, happy to put that up too. So I want to hear from all of you on your celebrations, large and small. Okay, so here's a cool link of interest this week. Procrastination versus Real Writing Crisis, How to Tell the Difference by Colleen M. Story on Writers Helping Writers blog. Yes, this is a great topic because a lot of times you get stuck and you're like, you're avoiding working on your manuscript, but sometimes it's because you've hit a block and you don't know how to get over it. And so this is a great article because she helps you figure out if you're just procrastinating or if there's something that you need to deal with. And then she gives you some action steps. So I created a bit.ly link that goes straight to this post, bit.ly/procrastination or crisis. It's hard to tell on that link, but it does say procrastination or crisis. Or you could just go to writershelpingwriters.net and look it up there. Okay, I hope that helps some of you. And now I get to introduce my lovely, lovely guest. And I'm trying to get my cursor over to the bio that I have on my other screen. Beth, I'm having trouble. So Beth Anderson, I can probably wing this without even looking at it. She is a former teacher. She has a bachelor in linguistics. She taught Beth, I'm doing this from memory, so because I can't get to my other screen, foreign language students. Oh, good, you're here. You could help me with your bio.
English language learners, yes.
Yes, foreign language learners. And you are the author of three acclaimed picture book biographies that are already out, 2 on their way, as you can see here, that are coming out in the next 6 months or so. And then I think I read 3 more under contract that are coming out like in 22, 23. So and Beth, you've won awards and accolades, and you've been on best book lists. And the other great thing, I want everybody to go check out Beth's blog, which is on her website, bethandersonwriter.com. I love your blog because you give book recommendations on your blog. You kind of help you either you're writing it or you have guest posts, but it's such a great resource for other writers as well as parents and teachers, because there's this in-depth analysis on all these other great books that are coming out. So go check that out, bethandersonwriter.com. And I'm going to stop sharing now. So thank you for being here, Beth. This is very exciting.
My pleasure.
The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll say it again toward the end, is Beth is going to be doing a webinar for us in December on writing picture book biographies, which I'm very excited about. This is a topic we've been asked about a lot. People are very, very interested in it. So tonight you're going to get just a little taste of Beth's vast knowledge on the subject. And then stay tuned and we'll send you the info as we get closer to the webinar about what she's going to be talking about. But the market for picture book biographies has really exploded in the last few years. Do you have any thoughts on why this has happened?
Well, I do, but first let me have a sort of a disclaimer here. I never set out to write biographies. It was sort of an accidental result of where somebody put my stories on the shelf, I guess.
Huh.
So,
Interesting.
it's I think along with this new interest in biographies and nonfiction is also shifting ideas about the genre in
Mm-hmm.
general and what
I
it
agree.
has to be. Because technically, a few of mine are not nonfiction, they're historical fiction. And
Mm-hmm.
those were choices that I know we're going to talk a little bit about later. But, the biographies in general, I think, and all nonfiction picture books have leapt into prominence lately because of, I think it's driven by education
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
need for nonfiction. I've been retired for almost 10 years, but I would say the last 10 years of my teaching, there was a really big push for nonfiction, and especially being able to pair fiction and nonfiction for kids so
Mm-hmm.
they see the difference and they get to evaluate truth versus, imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's coming from education and the demand there.
I agree. I agree. And a lot of curriculums have shifted to sort of integrating the different subjects together in different ways. And so biographies are a wonderful tool to use if you're learning, certainly in history classes, but then you can also use them in English, in language arts classes, and social studies. I mean, there's so much cross discipline, I guess, with
Mhm.
a picture book biography. And I think that's also why they work so well in schools now as well.
And really, I write the kind of books that I like to use in the classroom because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted all the literature elements and the great language to teach English for English language learners, but they also needed support throughout the entire curriculum. They needed social
Mm-hmm.
studies knowledge, they needed science backup, they needed everything, even
Mm-hmm.
math, because you throw a fourth grader into an English classroom and school for the first time, they have to catch up with 5 years of schooling.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so all of those kinds of things where you can cross curricular areas are so valuable because you're really getting a lot more bang for the book, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah.
So, what are some characteristics of picture book biographies today that maybe we wouldn't have seen like 20 years ago? We always tell people to study recently published books so you really see the style and the format that editors are looking for right now. Biographies have changed quite a bit, haven't they?
Yes, and I think that picture books in general, when I look back, of course, it's more than 20 years. When I
Sure.
look back to the 60s, when I was a
Yeah.
kid, I really don't remember much in the way of nonfiction picture books that weren't the informational variety.
Hmm.
There was Dr. Seuss and some basic imaginary stories, fictionals, but there wasn't a lot of nonfiction that was told in a narrative way. But
Yes.
when I started teaching, and there wasn't much to start with, but through those years, I could see that increasing and
Hmm.
becoming more available. And I would say 20 years ago, biographies tended to be cradle to grave,
Hmm.
birth to death, the entire person's life. And, when I was reading biographies, I was reading middle grade versions. So no illustrations and, just a very distant kind of birth to death accounting of the person's life.
Hmm.
Lots of text, um, supporting the illustrations pretty much matched the text and
Hmm.
weren't in such a supporting role as they might
Right.
be now. But in general, I would say it's the amount of text, the distant viewpoint, and that tendency to be the entire life scope.
Hmm.
But now that we push to shorter picture books and people want lower word counts, it's really tough to have a meaningful cradle to grave story. You have to be able to pick and choose and decide what is it that you want to tell.
Yeah.
So knowing that we were going to talk about this, I looked on my bookshelf, and I really didn't start writing till 2013. And so most of the books on my bookshelf are from 2013 on.
Hmm.
And the only one I have that was older was this one, Rosa by Nikki
Hmm.
Giovanni. And it's really interesting. And I picked it up at a library book sale. It's from 2004.
Hmm.
And I don't know the word count. It's not excessively long, but it's written a little bit differently. And one of the interesting things is when we start to think about biography structure, there are one, two, three, four. We don't get to the inciting incident until the fifth spread.
Hmm.
And nowadays, you've probably lost the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you compare that to Lizzie Demands a Seat, and
Hmm.
again, I wasn't really thinking bio, or maybe if I
Sure.
was, I would have started it differently. But the inciting incident for Lizzie comes on the first spread,
Hmm.
walking down the street, getting rejected from the conductor of the streetcar. So immediately you have the stress, you know her motivation, and you've got problem, big problem.
Hmm.
So, it hits a reader right away, and that really helps because also in this book, there's sort of this theme of in a
Yeah.
hurry she can't hold back. And I think when you start to write it, you need to write it like you're in a hurry. If you
Hmm.
dilly-dally for 2 or 3
Sure.
pages first,
Yeah.
you've kind of lost that urgency.
Right. We had emailed about this a little bit ahead of time, and another point you made was how the text and the illustrations are so much more integrated in a lot of the more modern bios than maybe they were in the past. And I have a spread here from your An Inconvenient Alphabet, and you can see here how the text and the illustrations are very integrated, and there's a lot of humor in this book, which I really appreciate. And I think that is something that I don't remember. And you're right. As a kid, I was the same way. I didn't have picture book biographies. My biographies were middle grade and up.
Yeah.
But even when I started in publishing in the mid '80s, and I was reading the biographies then, the humor and the sort of the creative writing style that you can use now uh, wasn't used then. It was much more straightforward, and it was almost like these are serious topics, you
Yeah.
know. But what you're doing really is you're talking about human beings and interesting things they did, or courageous things, or wondrous things, and having that emotional, thread run through the story. I think is important, and it must make it a lot more fun for you to write, to be able to incorporate humor and emotion into these books.
It does. And I think that's another element of biographies that has been enhanced in the
Hmm.
last, 10, 15 years too, is it really has to hit hard emotionally. And if you think about it, since the advent of Wikipedia and the internet, we can look up anything.
Hmm.
We can get all the facts we want,
Hmm.
but it's not necessarily engaging.
Right.
And so you have to make sure that your biography is different than a Wikipedia article.
Hmm.
There's
Sure.
got to be a special angle, a special emotional thread that will make that story matter to kids.
Hmm.
And you mentioned my blog. I just want to say something here about Mining for Heart series was started because I didn't know how to do it.
Hmm.
And so I started to ask those pros like Barb Rosenstock, what's the secret? Can you write an article for me on my
Yeah.
blog? And it really grew. And you were talking about how we all learn from each other. And I think that's the most valuable thing for writers is to have access to programs like this
Hmm.
and workshops and everything else, because that's our best way of learning.
Hmm.
And so all of those people that have contributed to that series really taught me how to dig into that emotional element and find what made that story special to me.
Right. Yes. That's great. Yes, it's a wonderful series on your blog. Everyone, definitely, I encourage everyone to go look that up. And what I love about the books that are highlighted on your blog and your books as well is it is making history come alive for the readers. So it's saying this is a living, breathing document. These are, the people might have lived a long time ago, but the things they did, still, the ripples are still here today.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a big difference too between the biographies today or whatever we want to call these. I mean, this is not, I wouldn't consider this a biography either, but that's where
On the
it's
biography shelf.
shelved. I think because we don't have a category for just interesting stuff from the past, you know.
Yeah.
So they've got to call it biography. But you're talking about a very specific problem these two men were trying to solve in an interesting way. It's not really, like you said, about their life. It's not a cradle to grave. It's
Right.
nothing. It's about,
And it's about two guys.
yeah. It's from two. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, they shelf it in my library in Loveland with Noah Webster biographies,
Hmm.
which is
Interesting.
that was a surprise to me. But I go for those events or these happenings with intriguing people,
hmm
and I guess it ends up a chunk of their life, and so it ends up on the biography shelf.
Right, right. Um, but that was going to be my next question for you, because I've noticed that a theme that sort of runs through a lot of your work is a celebration of the human spirit in a lot of ways, whether it's courage or ingenuity or some rare talent someone has that just made a big difference,
Like a
uh,
nose.
like a nose. Um, but it's really about that human spirit, and just we're celebrating these interesting things about these people. Um, are there certain criteria that you look for when you're choosing the topics that you're going to write about? Is there a way where you know that this subject is book worthy?
That's always tough. And I'm getting better at identifying that, but I still have a lot of stuff in the drawer that apparently is not book worthy. So it's a learning process. I tend to go for stories that about a person or an event where they see possibility where others don't.
Hmm.
And I love the stories where they see possibility that benefits others. It's not about aspirational goals for their own self necessarily, but the the betterment of the world kind of thing, making life better for others. Those are the ones that really grab my heart. And so, it's really an emotional decision when I nab on to something. But I would say the first step is it interests me. It's an interesting tidbit. It gets me curious. It makes me want to know more. And then when I start digging into it, I have to look at, what's there for kids?
Hmm.
Is there something that's going to hook their interest? Like Smelly Kelly and his super senses, that one I knew right off had so much kid stuff in it with the extraordinary nose. I mean, just think about it. Guy who could smell water, that's a curse and a blessing.
Yes.
Kids love stinks. And if stuff could blow up, even better. And there were so many surprises, crazy stuff that happened in the subway that it was just a really neat thing. But it's also about infrastructure.
hmm
Imagine that in a kid's book.
Yeah.
And to me, it was fascinating because it was kind of the intersection between science and social studies.
hmm
We'd like to separate all those things in the classroom. This is
Yeah.
science, this is social studies, but really everything in life is intertwined.
hmm
And when you think about a growing city, what's going on when a city is growing, and then you have science-based problems
Yeah.
that are coming from that. It's to me it's just a natural fun way to learn about something and find out about a really interesting guy.
hmm
So I look for those just really kind of quirky things. I look for things like in an inconvenient alphabet, I look for things about people we think we know about. but we don't know everything about them. Like,
Mhm.
what about Ben Franklin when he's not successful? All
Right.
we learn about are his successes, right? Well, what if
Mhm.
nobody likes his idea?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who decides what a success is? Is it you? Is it the public? I mean, there were lots of intriguing questions with that. And I was just fascinated. But what really got me with that story was the Ben Franklin quote that said, those who spell those who spell best are those who do not know how to spell, or something like
Mhm.
that. I messed
Right.
it up here, but
Yeah.
and to me, he was talking about the people who were not educated and the illiterate who were writing the sounds they heard
Mhm.
and not spelling correctly. Well, there was no standardized spelling at the time anyway. But as a teacher, it was kids. And so that really grabbed my heart. A
Mhm.
story has to grab my heart, that the kids are doing it right.
Mhm.
Kids are great thinkers like Noah Webster and Ben Franklin. Wouldn't
Mhm.
they love to know that?
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that's cool as a kid to think that you're doing what Ben Franklin wanted you to do.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Yeah. So it's those kinds of things. And when I get enough to start to really dig in to find that heart thread, I call it heart, and different people have different ideas of what heart is in a story.
Mhm.
For me, it's that kind of unique way that you filter a story through your own experience in life and
Mhm.
what you see that others might not see. That
Mhm.
I like to put something out there that will make kids think a little bit differently or ask questions or go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. You know,
Mhm.
so when I start to find that stuff and I find that heart thread and I have enough pieces to start to build that story with scenes, then I'm pretty much there.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'm still going to need more information as I keep going, as I find holes that I need to fill.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree. That heart is so important, and I know that with your webinar, you're going to get into that in great detail, because I agree. I think that's probably the most important component of any book, but especially a book about other people and great things that they did. Yeah.
And that's what makes an editor take notice, I think,
Hmm.
is that it's different in some way and it's special. And if you can make it matter to kids
Hmm.
in today's world.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's really key. And I've noticed with a lot of modern biographies, the writers are getting very good at that, are making it relevant to the reader in
Mhm.
some way, finding some little nugget from the subject's life or from their struggle or their problem or whatever that kids can truly understand and connect with on a very personal level.
Right.
And I wish that when I was a kid, we had those books. Wouldn't that have been wonderful? We've talked a little bit about this, but that line between fiction and nonfiction is getting more blurred uh, in picture books, and often depends on the publisher to decide if they're going to call it historical fiction or biography or whatever. Um, have you ever had to create some like a line of dialogue or some other detail in a book thinking that it's historical fiction and then a publisher decided to call it a biography?
Well, I think that no publisher ever told me to push it one way or the other.
Right.
I think they prefer nonfiction if you can do it.
Hmm.
But to me, the story comes first.
Right.
And I think most editors would agree. I mean, I don't have an exposure to many, many editors, but if you can't engage the child in the story and make them connect to it, what good is it?
Right.
So I feel like, there are some times when you need to just let the story be what it wants to be
Hmm.
or write it how you need to write it. Now, like with Lizzie Demands a Seat, it I mean, it's 99% nonfiction.
Hmm.
But when it came to the dialogue, we have Elizabeth Jennings' words in a newspaper article where she wrote her statement and she reports what she said and she reports what the conductor said. So it's it's reported speech. He said this, I said that, he told me this. Well, if you put it in there that way, it, to me, it ruins the proximity, that psychic distance that
Yes.
you're trying to establish to let the reader really get into Lizzie's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the difference between saying, he told me to stop and stop. You
Yeah.
know, it's huge, I think, in how the story reads and how a reader responds to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I sacrificed the technical
Yeah.
nonfiction label, and I
Mm-hmm.
tell in the back matter, and I think it's important to tell in the back matter, you know, full transparency,
Sure.
what you've done, what's not true, what you've changed,
Mm-hmm.
so that kids know.
Yeah.
And Lizzie's Demands a Seat has won several nonfiction awards, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been on nonfiction lists
Mm-hmm.
long last year. And so, you know, I think that as writers, we think we have these very strict things, and technically it's historical fiction. But the reality in the public with
Mm-hmm.
kids and teachers and parents and librarians is that's a nonfiction story.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And the fact that you took this written account and made it into dialogue doesn't change the event. It doesn't change what
Right.
happened. And I
And
think
there
that's
were,
the important thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
there were a few of the words she used that
Hmm.
we don't know today.
Yeah.
And actually, if you want a funny little anecdote from that one, I used some of her quotes. I tried them out, and when one of my critique partners read um, impudent as impotent. And so, so, you know, you don't want that stumble.
No. Not when a teacher's reading it out loud to a class. No.
No, no, those kids are smarter than you think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the point where I said, you know, I'm just going to have to change some of those words. So
Yeah.
that one changed to rude, because we all know what rude is, and rude is easy to read.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely.
But
And I
then,
think, oh, go ahead. What were you
well,
going to?
there's stories like Smelly Kelly and his super senses. And my agent has really helped me understand this, that, you know, there are some people from history where you really need to go nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other people from history, that's not the important part.
Mm-hmm.
The important part is the emotional resonance of the story. And so there's a little bit more fiction in this one, because, you know, this story just had so much fun stuff in it. I couldn't let it go.
Right.
But just using the anecdotes I had really didn't, it didn't zing. It didn't resonate at the end. You know, it was, but it turned to be so much fun when I took a little liberty with the beginning, because I didn't know anything about his childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagined that a boy with a super sensitive nose who could smell water and everything else, I imagined he would be wanting some other superpower. You know, he would probably want incredible strength or astonishing
Right.
speed. And
Right.
wouldn't all kids kind of think that way? So I kind of went with that, and it became my goal then to weave this superhero thread through the story,
Mm-hmm.
and how he realizes he is and other people sort of realize it. And, you know, he came out in the middle of the pandemic. He's an everyday hero, just
Mm-hmm.
like so many everyday heroes we had over the last year that really stepped up. They found their talents, they made a difference. And so it really, you know, after Lizzie and I was examining the idea of heroism and what makes a hero, and in that book I wanted the idea that we need these heroes, they inspire us, but they can't do it alone.
Right.
It's a disservice to kids to let them think these people are just going to come along and save us from
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, basically, right?
Yeah.
My story, my main point there is that kids need to be a part of it. We all need to be a part of the solution. We need to carry that strength forward in our own ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I started thinking about heroism with Smelly, and it went a different direction in his book. But, you know, that superhero thread was so much fun.
I
because
bet.
I planted lines from superhero movies in and I don't know if anybody has noticed them, but there are some words and there are some phrases from Superman and Spider-Man and
Wow.
even Ghostbusters. So it was so fun.
That's great. That's great. Well, and I imagine, and by the way, I just want to remind you all, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box so that I don't lose them in the chat box, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. You're writing for trade publishers, and so their definition of what's acceptable in what they might call a biography or historical, nonfiction book is maybe a little different than an educational publisher would. I imagine educational publishers, if you are writing a biography for an educational publisher that is providing books for the classrooms, not the bookstores, they're going to have probably stricter guidelines about you must be able to document every bit of dialogue that you
Right.
write.
Right.
So that's the difference too. A lot of people might not realize between the two markets. Trade publishers, the story is really
Yeah,
taking the lead.
I doubt an educational publisher would be interested in Smelly Kelly.
No, no.
It's it's not it's entertainment. It's it's not totally informational.
So where is Smelly Kelly in the library? Is it in biography or is it in
Yes.
history? Yeah.
They
So
don't know where to put it, I think.
yeah.
And
But
some
that's happening more
bookstores,
and more. Yeah.
yeah, some bookstores will put, I think they're starting to put all the picture books on a wall together, and some will separate fiction and nonfiction. And so I started to wonder too if it was an advantage or not to have a purely nonfiction book, because it would be over here in this little section on this shelf where nobody looks.
Right.
When you got all the other stuff that's fiction right out there shouting to the public, look
I
at me,
know.
you
I
know.
know.
So I don't really know if it's an advantage or disadvantage. I don't think anybody really reads the back matter and says, oh, this is technically nonfiction, or this is technically
No.
historical fiction. We'll put it over here.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I think we worry about that a little too much sometimes.
Yeah, I think
Basically, you're just writing the story you need to write, and then you're letting the publisher figure out what they're going to call it.
somebody else could put it on the shelf.
Yes, yes. So you mentioned back matter. I wanted to touch on that real quick. It's so important, and we're even seeing back matter in fiction picture books that are based on true events.
Yeah.
So, are there certain elements of back matter that you think are important that you make sure are in each book, or does it depend on the book?
Well, I think that an author's note is important. And one of the reasons is, as a teacher, I know it's really difficult for kids to determine author's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think author's notes now tend to be not about the author, but from the author and how they connected to the story and what made them want to write the story.
Mm-hmm.
So you can help kids by saying, what attracted you to the story, and basically sometimes your point of view comes out there too. So that is I think it's a valuable tool for teachers, and I don't think a lot of teachers realize that that's what's in a lot of authors' notes. And if they would look at that before kids write and have kids think about, why am I writing this? What am I passionate about here?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that gets me about this topic?
Mm-hmm.
I think their writing would really take off and be more meaningful,
I agree.
because that's what we miss in the classroom, is the passion behind the writing. And all of us who write these things, we got to love it in order to really work on it for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then through the entire publishing process, you have to be so invested in it. But kids generally aren't. And one thing I pointed out one time to a group of kids, in school, they learned 3 kinds of writing: information, persuasion, and entertainment, right? 3 purposes for writing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you look at a book like any of these books, really, I could tell them all 3 things are in every book.
Right.
because there is information, there is some entertainment, whether it's the drama of Lizzie or the humor of Smelly Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a little bit of persuasion too, because I'm trying to get them to think a little bit differently about something that comes through in my heart thread.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as clear cut as we like to categorize things.
Right. Right. Yeah. And again, that gets back to that creative writing. You know how you get to use all your resources as a writer and all your skills when writing these books, which I think makes them so much more fun to write and more satisfying, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me get to some of these questions here. Marianne did just ask in the chat box, who are your publishers? I know Simon and Schuster. It was Philomel, right?
Yeah,
Did
well, no,
or
An Inconvenient Alphabet was Paula Weisman Books
Paula
and
Weisman?
Simon
Yes.
and Schuster. And these others are all Calkins Creek, which is now a part of Boyd's Mills and
Mills.
Kane, which is now a part of Astra House Publishing. I have one next spring that's from Kids Can Press,
Right. Okay.
but the rest are all from Carolyn Yoder, the phenomenal editor at Calkins Creek.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Gail asks, so in some editor and agent panels that she's watched, she's heard that editors are starting to shy away from picture book biographies because the market is so oversaturated. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Have you gotten that impression?
Well, I think it is pretty much saturated, but that's all the more reason why your book has to stand out as different and has
Yes,
to really matter to kids or it won't be noticed. I mean,
correct.
I read a lot of books and I catalog them on a spreadsheet so I can refer back to them if I want for mentor tasks or see how someone's handling a certain subject. I just see a lot of biographies, especially biographies about women who all they all start the same way, you know. Well,
Mhm.
at this time, women couldn't do this or this or this, but this one wanted to do it, basically, you know.
Yeah.
And I think you got to start to think about how you can go at it differently.
Mhm. Mhm. I always say you'll hear these panel discussions of editors saying, we have too much of this, we don't want any more of that. But if you do that really well, they're going to want it. So,
Yeah.
like you said, it's a matter of coming at it in a different way because there are still hundreds of thousands of interesting human stories that have yet to be told
Mm-hmm.
that could be great picture book subjects. And it's just a matter of finding them.
And one of the things I'll get into in that webinar about biographies, if you look at all the books about one single person, like
Mhm.
Martin Luther King or Ada Lovelace or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you can see how each one is very different.
Mhm.
There are so many, there's as many ways as people of how to tell a story.
Mhm.
And if your way is special enough, even though somebody's not looking for biographies, you knock their socks off with something, whether it's funny or meaningful or just whatever,
Mhm.
you've got their interest.
Right.
So I think a part of it too might be the approach of don't approach it like a biography,
Mhm.
approach it as this really great story
Yes.
that you want to tell.
Yes. Yes. How do you find your subjects? Do you just stumble across these things and then you start researching them?
Yeah, basically, I do. I subscribe to various peculiar and odd listservs and stuff like that, and like I ran across that thing about Ben Franklin wanting to change our alphabet. He deleted 6 letters and made up 6 new ones so that sounds would match letters. And I thought, boy, that would have been great if that would have
No
worked.
kidding. I thought the same thing because I was not a great speller as a kid. I was like, this would have saved me.
Yeah, but then you read it and you go, well, there's not really much of a story there.
Yeah.
He wasn't successful. So you keep digging and you keep digging, and then you go, oh, he was friends with Noah Webster. Isn't that cool? One's old, one's young, one is gracious, one is snotty. You know, they're just so different. They're like Laurel and Hardy kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And how they both came at a problem from different directions, but the solution would have been the same.
Uh-huh.
So that was fascinating too, that there are many ways to solve a problem, right? Or many ways to
Yes.
see a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. So if sometimes if you dig far enough, you'll
Mm-hmm.
find a story.
Yes.
But you have to love. I had encountered that quote that really hooked me in the heart. Otherwise, I probably would have left it. But
Mm-hmm.
then I also tried to write it with, you know, an ending that didn't really go anywhere. And the editor said, you can't end a story like that. You got to pull something good out of it. So go to the dictionary. Don't just leave it as a little mention, but make it a part of the story. And, you know, there you have it, because you've got the complete arc.
It is, and it's a triumph at the end. The dictionary is, we still use it. I mean, obviously, it's evolved since then, but yes, and the inconvenient alphabet also struck me as great to study for structure, because you have the rule of three in here.
Yeah.
You have, and that's what's so important when you find a subject or a little nugget that you want to turn into a book. You still have to have a good story structure
Right.
so that it's readable and compelling, and there's page turns. And I think a lot of times with nonfiction, that is a big challenge, because
You can't make up stuff.
you can't make up stuff.
Even though your critique partners might tell you, well, can't you just do this here?
Yes, yes.
No, it's nonfiction.
You can't make up big events. We talked about maybe paraphrasing dialogue here or
Yeah.
there,
You
but
can
as
sort
far
of
as,
imagine for James Kelly, because nobody knows who James Kelly is, but
yes, yes.
you can't really do that for Ben Franklin, because
No,
the
no.
major historical
Yes,
figure.
someone would call you on that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like the stories like Smelly Kelly, and like the new one coming out in October, Tad Lincoln's Restless Regal, those were really hard. And one of them helped me with the other, because it was a lot of anecdotes.
Hmm.
And so you have to build your arc with those pieces and find stakes and motivation and escalation, and, you know, that big emotional punch that you're going to need at the end. So it's kind of like you have to pick your pieces and
Yes.
try them out. So yeah, it's working with nonfiction, I think, is its own unique challenge,
Hmm.
because you have to find a way to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yes, it is assembling a puzzle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine sometimes that missing piece just requires you to keep researching until you find it.
Exactly. And there's a really good example with Lizzie Demands a Seat. Um, I could not get her trial records for that court
Mm.
case. I couldn't get those records. Nobody had them. They concluded after about a year of searching that they were probably lost in a warehouse fire, and there might not have been much there anyway except the docket.
Sure.
And one of my questions was about the jurors, and would they have all been white men?
Mm.
Would she be able to testify? Could I have her testify or not? Could I, you know, you can't.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any of that information, but I was lucky enough to find an expert who could answer those questions and say, this is how it was. This would have been the atmosphere of the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
She would not have been allowed to testify, not because she was Black, but because she had a financial stake. So, you know, there's all kinds of things you don't think about. And
Mm-hmm.
the jurors, there could have been Black jurors because Black men could vote,
Mm-hmm.
but there probably weren't, because, you know, of the discrimination that was in all aspects of life. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that's going to be a real problem for the illustrator, because I don't know whether they were all white or not. But when E.B. Lewis drew it, it wasn't a problem at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
because he didn't draw them all.
Smart. Very smart.
And I don't know if he even thought about that, or just focused on getting up close and personal with a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what you think is a problem isn't a problem,
Yeah.
but the more you research, the more holes you can fill where you're missing information.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, and also for Lizzie Demands a Seat, looking at the times and really exploring that setting, the African American movement. When one pillar of that was education. So her being a teacher suddenly takes on more meaning in that context because now she's an activist.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads to motivation, right?
Right.
For everything that she did. So I think, yeah, even if you're not researching that person, that event, researching that place and that time is essential to really filling in all the pieces,
Mm-hmm. I
getting that
agree.
context of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow. That's so fascinating. I just love the whole process. Can you speak at all? This is a question from Billy to non-historic bios, people who are living contemporary. Do you imagine the process is going to be very similar, except that you might be able to actually contact the subject? Do
I
you have
have
any
some
experience?
critique partners who have done living people. I
Mhm,
have attempted a few living people. I have been rejected by some. I have talked to a few. Those are still in the drawer because they don't seem marketable.
mhm,
It just depends what you've got to work with.
yes,
I think, if a person is a public figure, you can do it without their permission. You can do it your own way. I
mhm,
think it helps if you can win them over and let them, you know, check for accuracy, and that you don't want to hand it over to them, and you want to maintain that you're telling as you see the story. And so it's a really tricky thing, I think.
right, yeah. And it depends how much of a public figure this person is. If they're a private person and you just happen to discover something interesting about their story, you probably want to get their permission before writing about them. I would imagine you don't, I mean, you can run into issues there. So it's a little trickier. Public figures are
Yeah,
different.
and I think, in a case like that, if you research first and you have an idea what you want to do, and you send them a note and you tell them all that you've learned and why you want to write their story, and what you think is so great about the message you have for kids from their story,
Hmm.
I think most people will want to work with you.
Yes.
But there are some who will say, don't you write a thing about that or I'll call my lawyer.
Yeah. Yep. So there's not much you can do about that. Yeah.
No, not really.
So we've had several questions here. So let's just touch on this very briefly about writing about a person who is a different race than you. And were you worried about that at all with the Lizzie book? The illustrator E.B. Lewis is an African American illustrator, and I know a lot of times publishers do that. Uh, was there any? Did you worry about that at all? Did you have to get extra sensitivity readers or anything like that to read your manuscript?
Well, I started Lizzie Demands a Seat in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
which was before Own Voices was such a big
Yes.
part of writing. And there was people looking for diverse stories. And so I kind of approached it from that. But I also approached it from the point that white people need to dig into this history.
Sure.
White people need to change and need to learn, because we're the ones perpetuating racism and systemic racism. And so I came to that book wanting to show that larger platform where all of us have a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
But as I saw over the years that it took to get that under contract and then through the publishing process, the Own Voices uh, was becoming very, very strong. And I have to say, I was worried that I would receive pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are some editors and agents that really don't want to go there if that's not
Mm-hmm.
your experience. But I think it's different too with something that old.
Yes.
because no one was alive then.
Yeah.
I wouldn't attempt to write the Martin Luther King's "I Have Dream" speech story,
No.
because there's plenty of people around who were there and who experienced this, and I didn't.
Hmm.
So yeah, I was nervous. I did research a lot, trying to understand it and trying to find something within me that would give me a spark of what maybe she felt, even though it's just a teeny, teeny, tiny what bit of
Sure.
what she lived, you
Hmm.
know. So I think it depends on, it is hard. And really, I got no pushback openly. I think some of the rejections might have been because of that.
Could have been. Yeah.
I, Carolyn Yoder is an editor who goes for story. She saw it as an important story, and she wasn't worried about that.
Yeah.
I told her I wanted an African American illustrator, so it would be a collaboration, and she was all in on that. So
Yeah.
I think it's always changing. And
It
now
is
we have this
constantly
thing
changing.
with own voices being, well, maybe we went too far with own voices. Maybe we made it mean something it
Yeah.
shouldn't mean. It's very complicated.
It
I,
is, and I agree that it's a constantly evolving topic. And even now, you can talk to 10 editors, and some of them will say it depends on the manuscript and how well researched it is, etc. And other editors will say, nope, I wouldn't touch it if it was written by if it's a black story written by a white person. So it just depends, and I think you obviously did your due diligence with your research and making it as accurate as you could. And all you can do is send it out and see what happens. Yeah.
yeah, and the fact that E.B. Lewis loved it
Oh, yes.
and didn't object or comment on anything in the
Hmm.
text,
Yeah.
that meant a lot to me, because
Sure. Sure.
to me, it helped me feel like it was legitimate and it was okay.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you fear that. And before I went to New York right before the pandemic broke open, after Lizzie was released, and I had they arranged a Kidlit TV session, last minute I got to be a part of the African American History Month panel at Books of Wonder
Hmm.
with E.B. Lewis
Wow.
and Ogie Mora and Jerry Pinkney and
Hmm.
a couple others. And yeah, I thought, ooh, this could be
It
difficult, but it was okay.
was okay.
I
Great.
just basically spoke from my heart, and
Yes.
it was okay. What
Yeah.
can,
No, I agree. I agree. So that's great. I'm glad. I'm
but
glad.
in the future, I will be much warier,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think, because a lot has changed since 2015.
Yes. Yes. That is true. And even books that have come out in the last year that are written by, say, white authors and have gotten great acclaim, those were under contract for 3 years before they came out. So, it's the changes are still to come, I think, with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple more questions and I'll let you go because we're at the top of the hour, but this has been so wonderful. Thank you. Violet is asking,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry, my room overheats here when I have the door closed.
Oh, no problem.
The light.
um, Violet's asking, as the author of picture book biographies, do you intentionally allow the illustrator to tell small parts of the story through images, as you would with a fiction picture book? Do you leave sort of those gaps for the illustrator to fill in information or action?
It really depends on the editor.
Okay.
Um, with An Inconvenient Alphabet, it was my first experience, but I had some notes, and I had asked the editor if the illustrator could take on the role of showing some of these things in the illustrations that would just mess up the text by being too complex to explain, like the different spellings of the words. on the Ben Franklin picture that you showed,
Mm-hmm.
and the rules. And, there's just a few little spots in there where the illustrator, Elizabeth Badley, did an amazing job making those concepts come across in the illustrations. So I didn't have to really make it a real focus of the text.
Mm-hmm.
Although it was in text, but the text moved into the illustrations.
Yes.
So that was a great way to handle it. Some editors say with a picture book, I know there's this different story thing with illustrations and text, but I don't know if it always works with nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
So you should be able to read it aloud
Mm-hmm.
and understand the whole story without seeing the pictures.
Right.
So I leave a lot of the details to the illustrators that will enhance the story, but they're not key to understanding the story.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, so what I've learned to do at the suggestion of my agent is at the end of a manuscript or on a separate email or something, I write a lot of illustration notes, not saying you should draw this, but saying, here's a picture of her lantern. Mm. It was night. This was dusk. There were 20 men here. They were wearing regular clothes. They weren't wearing the Minutemen uniforms, like for Prudence Wright, Revolutionary Prudence Wright. So a lot of the historical details that could be an important part of the picture and lend a lot to the story, but they don't have to be in the text to enjoy the story.
Yes, yes. I like that. And then just detail of time period can be shown through the illustrations. What, not just the clothes they wore, but if they're, the type of dishes they used on their tables when they were eating, or I noticed that Ben Franklin and Noah Webster are drinking tea together quite a bit, and that's not spelled out in the text, but that would have been very typical of that time, and things like that. The illustrator can flesh out for you. Yeah. Okay. Great. Final question, because we've had a lot of questions on word count. Do you do picture book biographies, or the kind of books you write, if we don't want to call them biographies?
We don't know what they are.
You don't know what they are. Are you?
I don't worry about that anymore.
Yes. Yes.
I write a fun story.
Do you worry so much about the word count? Do you try to stay under a certain amount of words, or do you just sort of tell the story?
I just must be a wordy person or something. I enjoy the words. I enjoy the text. I enjoy imagery, wordplay. I really love words. So I'm not a person who can write a biography in 500 words. Yeah. I tend to end up about 1,000 words, sometimes 1,200 words. And I really try to get it down under 1,000. Mm-hmm. If I could get it into 800 something, that would be great. Mm-hmm. And some of mine are, but some of them aren't. Because one thing I've learned is that when you start cutting everything, there's confusion that pops up with the editors. And, Carolyn Yoder has very strong feelings about what needs to be there to provide the context for the kids to understand the time and the place and the situation. Mm-hmm. And so when you start cutting too much, you lose that.
Yes.
It's hard to recognize it because you know it in your head. So it's always there for you, but somebody else reading it maybe goes, what?
Exactly. Well, and I imagine what's most important, obviously the information, and then the pacing. You still need that page turning quality as you would with a fiction picture book. So do you create dummies of your text so you can see how it reads as you turn the pages? Do you do anything like that with your manuscript?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think that editors tend to go for the feel of the story. Mm-hmm. They're not going to go, 1,500 words. There's no way we're doing this. Right. They're going to read the story. And if it lags and drags, it's going to feel too long, even if it's 800 words. Right.
Mhm.
So pacing is huge. And the pacing class I took a long time ago really taught me so much. And I really enjoy working with the pacing.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm learning more about page turns and how to, get the urgency and the immediacy that you want for those page turns. And the last couple manuscripts I've actually written them with page breaks in them.
Hmm.
When I did the first draft, I took the pieces I had and dropped them into the manuscript as scenes, because that's one of my downfalls, is sometimes I don't really make it a scene. I just sort of, this happened, you know. But to really be better at, I wanted myself to really be better at building scenes and leading into the page turn and giving that impetus to turn the page. And
Mhm.
that, and that really has helped me. And I end up taking the page turns out when I send it,
Right.
but some editors might want it, some might not. But to me, that has really helped me push it, because I can see how much text I have there, and I can say, oh, that's too much for one spread. I'm going to have to try to find a way to cut that back,
Mhm.
or build it to two spreads if it's
Mhm.
worth it.
Right.
So having that visual chunk has really helped me
Mhm.
build the scenes and build in the page turns. And sometimes I do actually cut it up and stick it in a dummy.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's very, very helpful to do. Great. Well, thank you, Beth. This has been wonderful. I learned a lot. I'm sure I know everybody here learned a lot. And I appreciate your time, your expertise, and lots of people in the chat box are so excited to go read all of your books.
Great.
So, and I'm happy for that. And we will be looking forward to your webinar in December. So it's going to be more of this great stuff.
Well, I'm just grateful for all the, this wonderful Kidlit community that has so many ways to learn.
Mhm.
Because
It really does.
I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for all those people that have helped me.
Good. Well,
I'm happy to share.
that's great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here tonight. And we will see you next week. In the meantime, have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Hmm.